Hello and welcome to the Embrace Your Destiny podcast. My name is Sandra Dawes and I'm your host. And if you're new to the podcast, just to give you a little bit about it, this is all about sharing the journeys of women who have been through a challenging time in their life and they've made it through to the other side. They've survived that challenge and they've learned lessons from that experience, and they're here to share those lessons with you as well as give advice to anybody who might be going through something similar in their own life. And my guest today is Laura Valenti. And Laura started dancing with Susannah and Yakov Darling-Khan, the creators of School of Movement Medicine, in 2009. And as soon as she found this form of mindfulness in motion, she fell in love with it, and she continued to dance as much as she could, even when she had cancer. Her work is informed by her training in sound and voice therapy, clowning, physical theater, and other healing modalities, and her background in law, sociology of migration, and human rights. She has lived, traveled, and worked in the UK, California, Peru, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Italy, working both with groups and on a one-on-one basis. She shared movement medicine with indigenous communities, people in drug and alcohol rehabilitation, refugees, and vulnerable adults. Laura was born in Italy, where she learned about good food, hospitality, colorful swearing, and native ancient forms of ecstatic dance. Recently, she moved to Spain with her partner, and her dream is to find a land to steward and restore, to create her garden and invite people to dance and reconnect to the elements inside and around them. Laura, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today with you and with your audience. I'm really excited and touched, actually, to have this opportunity. Thank you.
Laura, I mean, you've traveled so much. We'll have to offline have more of a conversation about all these amazing places you've been to. I think I've only been to the UK out of the list in your bio, but everywhere else sounds really exciting as well. So Laura, why don't you start with sharing the journey that you want to talk about today?
Yes, thank you. With pleasure. I would like to share really how the journey started with dance, because it was when I was very little, actually. I lost my mom when I was 6 years old, suddenly, actually. She died of brain aneurysm from one day to another, so it was very unexpected. And as you can imagine, that threw the family in complete chaos and panic and really messy times. And I think that because of the culture in Italy in those years, the 80s, a quite old-fashioned country which had very little culture, around therapy and healing. My family went through really difficult times, not knowing very well how to cope with a little one, basically. And so after my mom died, my dad and I lived with my grandparents, who also were quite traditional, I would say, and pretty much, traditional people, going to church, religious, old-fashioned. And to an extent, the loss and the grief transformed me pretty much as I was very young into a little rebel, I would say. So one of the favorite things I had when I was small, and to an extent, I remember that I used to do that because I knew that I would bother my grandmother a little bit, or I would make her feel a little bit scandalized with my behavior, was that I would lock myself in the living room, put the music full on volume, dancing to the strangest things, like heavy metal, like Iron Maiden, very strange things, like Ozzy Osbourne and Guns N' Roses a little bit later. So I would dance and dance and sweat and sweat and sweat until I was exhausted. And then I had these memories of my grandmother, a little bit like in a comic or in a cartoon, coming in, opening the door, yelling, telling me to put the volume down. And then I would put it even higher and yell back at her and, shout, leave me alone. I'm busy here. So I think that was my very intuitive and somewhat natural form of self-soothing and stress release. Really.
Right. Yeah. Because it was, therapeutic for you to like just
absolutely
get rid of all that pent up frustration
Yeah. I obviously didn't know that consciously.
Yes.
So it's very interesting just to see how children do things naturally, So as a child, I would say intuitively and naturally knew that to move my body was a way to really get stuff out of my system. Because of the stressful environment where I was living, I remember this feeling since being a child, actually, of having the perception, of knowing that it would take me a long time before I could see the light on the other side of the tunnel. Somewhat, I knew that. And I remember also thinking like, I was bothered by being under the authority of adults,
right. Yeah.
And I knew that it would take a long before I could be independent. So years passed by, and the dance was then, brought after into weird and not really bright places, like clubs and discotheques, where also I started to abuse, alcohol and drugs. So by the time I was a young adult, I had a very little sense of self-care, self-esteem, and looking after myself. I just really didn't know how to do that. And as oftentimes we hear, in various fields, from spirituality to psychology, as a child, I probably took on a lot of the responsibility, and the sense of guilt of my mother not being there any longer. Children have the tendency to interiorize these kind of situations. So I just really didn't know what to do with myself. And I can say that I have been lucky enough, not only that I lived and survived, but also that I didn't end up being in big problems, or that I didn't have accidents. I really put myself in, I would say, also dangerous situations, like I would wake up in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning, completely drunk in the middle of the road, and my friends were all gone and they didn't know where I was, stuff
right.
like that. Yeah. I was tempted also to experiment with heroin, and I was lucky enough actually that I was scared of needles.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was pretty phobic with needles, so that actually prevented me to inject heroin in my veins. So I put myself in all sorts of weird circumstances, including having, obviously boyfriends and, really dysfunctional relationships. And again, because I didn't know how to take care of myself, I would allow people to treat me in a way that it wasn't healthy, and I would become very easily a doormat and have also a very little sense of boundaries, So, as I said, I would say by the age of 21, I had another maybe feeling of knowing how long I needed, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to take a long time. I knew that I was in a mess. And that wasn't a time where in Italy we were talking about self-help or self-development, nothing of that, So I felt that I was pretty much on my own, and all I could do it was to experiment. And the feeling I had, and I remember it was like a bulb went on, because a lot of the discomfort I was experiencing, it was in my body. I remember particularly sometimes when taking drugs, the drugs would amplify the sense of discomfort in my body, like I would feel weird and clumsy and rigid and stiff and really, really not comfortable. And this sometimes I would experience also in daily life, of not feeling fluid or flexible, So a bulb went on, and I understood that in my own journey to include the body at all levels and to heal through the body, it was key. So then I started just to experiment and to test. So I started a little bit with yoga, the classical things, until I then discovered the dances, which are part of the Italian tradition. So when we speak, for example, about ecstatic dances, in Italy, actually, we have a form that is really ancient and original, it's not something just contemporary. So these dances belong to the south of Italy. There are very specific form of drumming that accompany the dance, and certain specific rhythm and patterns of the drum support the change of the brainwaves, and, shift somewhat, consciousness and awareness around oneself. So it's a long story, I'm going to summarize it a little bit, but that was another element that came in while I was still, figuring things out. And in the meanwhile, I was studying law, and I was interested, in learning a few things about justice and human rights, and probably, coming from a childhood where I felt that what happened to me was unfair, I developed a pretty strong sense of empathy and sensitivity, towards injustice. So I was very interested in learning how I could make a contribution, And then life went on until I decided to study theater, physical theater, particularly as another form to understand more what it means to live in this body, because to an extent I had also the feeling and the understanding that I was a little bit dissociated, I was having a lot of problems in terms of sometimes feeling that I was going really crazy, I was suffering from obsessive and repetitive thoughts, and there were many moments in which I felt also suicidal, and also that sometimes there was a split between really being here in the physical body and part of me really being somewhere else. I really don't know where, part of me wasn't fully here.
Right, not fully present.
Yes, I wasn't, and it was all this circle of obsessive thinking and a lot of paranoia, a lot of fear, because obviously also, again, what happened when I was a child, it triggered so much, at the physiological level, also the adrenals and cortisol and stress and all of that. And at that point in my mid-20s, I didn't have yet an opportunity to really have a wider understanding of what that meant and why I was feeling that way. And also forgiving myself for feeling that way, and understanding that to an extent it was also normal to feel in that way, considering the circumstances I was coming from, So I knew to an extent that I needed to relax my nervous system, but I really didn't know what was happening and what I had to do. And so after I graduated, then I went to Hungary. I spent some time there, living, studying, doing a few things, until I decided to move to England and study theater there, as I mentioned. And then I got cancer. So I got the cancer actually when I was 33. So it was mostly, more or less, sorry, at the same age in which my mother died. She died when she was 34.
Oh, wow.
So I say to myself, okay, it cannot be really random, right? So I had already some years of therapy behind me. I had a therapist when I was in Budapest. So as soon as I was diagnosed, actually it was a fast growing cell cancer. It was non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And I was misdiagnosed actually a few times. So for a couple of months, I was in excruciating pain and I could barely walk. The cancer was pushing behind my breastbone, and actually it did fracture my breastbone. So it was also pushing, against the nerves, and, I would have pain in my back and in my arms. And it took a while before the doctors, unfortunately, understood that. So I went then for a cycle of chemotherapy, 6 cycles actually of chemotherapy. And then I realized that there was some more work to do, that this cancer was really telling me something. And it was an opportunity to make choices, and also to pray and to hope that I could have another opportunity to be here. I remember thinking that actually I really didn't want to die. I wasn't ready to go.
Right. You still had work to do.
It's exactly, this is what I felt exactly. It was like, okay, I still have a lot of things that I want to do. I have a lot of passion. I want to share, the things I love. I want to learn. I want to see more the world. I want to love. I want to travel, and so I decided that I would make out of cancer an adventure, rather than taking it as something that would, made me feel utterly terrified. And I was scared, obviously. It's not that I wasn't scared, but I made as much as I could the conscious decision to include also an element of play, and include curiosity and experimenting with things. So at that time also I was dancing a lot, as I might have written in the biography. It was in that year actually that I met my teachers. So I remember going to classes and workshops, between chemotherapy and being bald, without hair and without eyebrow, and so needing also to embrace this different way of being, also physically. I was bloated, my face was swollen, because I was taking steroids. So also my body was really, bombarded to an extent, so with chemicals, but I was lucky enough because I decided also at that point, not only that I would dance, but I would move as much as I could. So I was riding the bicycle. I went to hike. I remember hiking actually under the snow in, northern England and all of that. So I wanted to, I didn't want to feel that I was a victim, in that moment. And then I experimented, with few things. And then as soon as the cycles of chemotherapy finished, in the hospital, they wanted to give me radiotherapy, which I rejected at the time. And I am aware that this is a very delicate topic, so I'm not suggesting anything to people, who are in a similar situation at the moment. I'm not a doctor.
Right.
I'm just sharing, what happened to me. I knew that at that point, because of my age, I didn't want to add the radiotherapy on my chest, after 6 cycles of chemotherapy. So I walked out of the hospital. I knew that I was fine at that point. And so by the time, in fact, I did, the last scan, a few months after, they said that there was no activity any longer, cancerous activity, malignant activity. And so, I survived. And I decided also that all those creative aspects that were so important for me at this point, also even more so as an adult, moving and dancing. I wanted not only to learn more at the personal level, but I wanted to learn more also professionally in order to be able to share it with others. So I started this very long journey and apprenticeship program, with the School of Movement Medicine. Until then, I went into professional training with a lot of hours of supervision and mentoring and self-reflective practice. Is a very profound training, actually. And so I graduated as a teacher and as a facilitator. And then I investigated also my relationship, not only with sound, but also with my voice, because there was something that was coming for me, let's say at the physical level. I was really curious to hear my voice more. So there was a really, how can I say, practical, physical tangent, that I could touch, how can I say, aspect. And then there were different layers. There were the metaphors, related to using my voice, and the storytelling related to how my voice was connected also to the women who came before me. And this was related to the perception that I had around my culture, around Italy, where my sense was that oftentimes women particularly were muted and blocked in
no
their
voice.
creative. Yes, exactly, in their creative expression. So I started to have this urge, it was like really something urgent, if I pronounce it well in English, for me to play and experiment with my voice and really like hearing myself loud, doing strange noises. I remember sometimes I would walk just close to a river, where there was the strong sound of the water, and then I would sing to the water, or simply I would make noise. So there was a lot of permission somewhat that was given to myself. I needed to reclaim that for myself. And I have the feeling that I was reclaiming that also for the women who came before me. And at the end, I didn't know whether that was true or not, but it was a story in that moment that for me was uplifting, and it was making sense, and it was giving me a lot of inspiration, to do something that I felt that ultimately it was really good for me. So there was something about really learning how can I learn, forgive the repetition, to be good to myself,
Yeah.
and how, yes, can I do that by connecting to things that I love, and how can I express myself more freely.
Laura, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned through this journey?
The biggest lesson that I learned, I think it has been related to knowing that I was scared through cancer. I would say something that is not true if I would say, oh no, I wasn't scared. I had no fear. No, the fear was there. But there was something about choosing not to drown in fear, or not to become enslaved to it. So I knew I was there. And then I chose these practices, particularly movement, between chemotherapy sessions, as a form of meditation. Actually, it is an active form of meditation to be really present. Because I knew that if I would give up into the fear of dying, that could have been not only overwhelming, but I couldn't afford that in terms of needing to function more clearly, make more informed choices, to be able to be more with myself and decide what to do. Okay, I'm in the hospital. They want to give me an extra scan. Am I saying yes or am I saying no? They want to do this. Does it feel good? It doesn't feel good. So it was a practice to be actually really, as many say, in the present moment as much as possible, knowing that the fear was there and forgiving myself also eventually for that, or accepting myself for that,
Yeah, and I feel like you took your power back, right? Because I feel like when you get those kinds of diagnoses that you can just give into it, feel like that's going to define your future, but you chose to not allow that diagnosis to define what was possible for your future, that you were going to get through it, and that because you knew that you weren't ready and that you had work to do, that you were going to find a way to heal yourself.
Yeah. And there was something, I think is related to the beauty of poetry and storytelling. It's a little bit what I said before. I said to myself, I'm going to make an adventure out of this. And that it was about saying a different story. It wasn't about necessarily about saying the story of poor Laura, even if a lot of times, obviously, I felt pretty sorry for myself and miserable. But I said to myself, I'm going to make an adventure out of this. And I think that shifted the narrative, the stories that I was saying to myself, first of all, about it. But that gave me also the additional important possibility to be more creative with that, to be more creative in the stories I was saying around it, but to be more creative in the daily choices, actually, because I remember, for example, one day, it was literally after chemotherapy, the day after, I was cycling in London, the day after, So I made choices to be on an adventure. And I bought funny hats, because it was cold in the winter. And I wore big earrings, and I allowed myself to use my creativity and my imagination. And I think that had a tremendous force. And it really freed a lot of energy and possibilities, and different ways of being with that. So as you say, a diagnosis like that, and I am aware that there are, different kind of diagnoses, and different, situations. And yet, as you say, the cancer, it doesn't have to define us, and it doesn't have to be awful sentence, about how we want to live. And actually, I didn't invent a wheel, as you say, because one of the things that I've done also, I've read a lot of inspiring stuff. So I started to research, all the books and the authors and the stories actually of the people who recovered. And so many stories were miraculous.
Yeah.
Many, 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 many miraculous. So I say to myself, I am going to inspire myself, and I will do all that I can to live. And perhaps the lesson was also, and I must say that sometimes nowadays I still may be a little bit forgetful, the lesson was also about how precious is life. When I was presented really with the possibility that I could go, I clinged onto life a lot.
Yeah.
And it's not, to an extent, maybe part of me has a paradox. There was a paradox. There was a moment where I was also at peace eventually, But I embraced the life more than ever. So it was the challenge and the difficulties and the struggle and the diagnosis that actually pushed me to become more alive and bring forward more strength. And as I said, in a more creative way, find my resources, creatively. So, we all carry wounds, and all of us, we have different stories and traumas, and a lot of grief and suffering and all of that. We all encountered loss in life. So I think that probably the question that we can ask ourselves is, what are we going to do with that?
Right. Yeah.
And how are we going to embrace or use that material in such a way that, perhaps in an alchemical way, we are transforming that into gold, and for ourselves and for others. I am personally a great believer, in the interconnection between the personal and the collective,
Yeah.
So what we do ripples out,
Laura, what advice would you give to somebody going through something similar in their own life right now? So somebody who might have just gotten a diagnosis and, is feeling a bit hopeless.
Well, the first thing would be find support. Reach out for support to people that you trust. So I'm not talking about, gathering random people.
Right.
No.
Yeah. Build your support system with the right people.
Build your support system accordingly, in accordance with your belief system. You don't have to push yourself to do anything that is not, feeling okay for you. So I'm not saying go to this therapy rather than other. No. The first thing I would say, build support. That can be a trusted circle of friends. It could be a trusted nutritionist, or go to a gym that you like if you still have the stamina, hopefully, to exercise, find a buddy to swim or to ride the bicycle, whatever that is that it works for you. Build support. Maybe somebody who comes and visits you on a regular basis, or if you're weak, somebody who helps you preparing your meals. Depending on the circumstances, I would say that support is key. So there is a lot about learning also to reach out and ask for help. The other thing I would say, it is be selfish and put yourself first. So this is not the time to be nice. This is not the time to please people.
Yeah.
So if there are people that you don't want around for your personal reasons and relationship with them, either because they drain you or they make you feel tired or they're not uplifting, it's very important to be selfish. Put your health first and draw boundaries. So learn also to say no, and take some time for yourself, and remove the people or the situation or the TV programs or the magazines, whatever that is, that trigger your worries and your anxiety, rather than nourishing your inspiration and your capacity to stay as open and as receptive and as positive and as present in the present moment as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Yeah, because I think that when you're trying to heal yourself from whatever it is, whether it's cancer, whether it's, emotional trauma, whatever that is, you really have to take care of yourself, and you have to really limit your exposure to negative situations, negative people, and really, protect yourself so that you can heal in the most positive environment possible.
Yeah, because you have to consider that is a moment of heightened, tenderness, vulnerability, sensitivity. So it is now more than ever the moment to learn to take care of yourself and really allow yourself to do that. Give yourself permission. This is, there is so much prejudice, about putting oneself first, but it's really necessary. So make yourself and your life really, really precious, and think that what you're doing, you're really taking care of the preciousness of your life. You're precious, and you have all the right to decide how you want to do that. And that includes also trusting yourself and trust in your judgment, because people will want to give you advices.
Oh,
People
yeah.
will want to tell you what to do, where to do it, how to do it, which kind of therapy, which kind of hospital, where to go, and all of that. So here again, boundaries, I would say, also in this situation. And at the same time, trust yourself.
Yeah, because I feel like, especially when it comes to the self-care piece, that we forget that when we take care of ourselves, then the people in our lives will benefit from that, right? So it's not like, so even selfishness is the greatest gift you can give to the other people in your life. Because when you do take care of yourself so that you can be at your best, then you can give a piece of your best to the other people in your life. And I think that we sometimes forget that.
Yeah, and these things sometimes are also very subtle, So it is possible that when we have patterns of pleasing others and, not knowing how to say no and all of that, we are possibly repeating a pattern, that we've learned in the family, and, that possibly the people who came before us, they knew it, and so on. So when we are making a different choice, actually, we are doing something very important, because we are breaking a pattern, and that it is not just about us, so the repercussions also in this case will ripple in all directions, also in relationship to the future, in relationship to the little ones in the family, if there are, but even if there are no children, there is a strong impact when we make this kind of different choice, and we are really, changing direction. So it's something very, very strong, actually. It's something very strong that we can do for ourselves and for the goodness of all our relationships, literally.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Laura, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your journey and the experiences and the lessons you've learned and the advice that you've provided. I think that the listeners will find it all very valuable. And for those of you listening who might be in your car or on the road somewhere, walking your dog, at the gym, you can come back and check out the show notes and learn more about Laura and what she's up to. There'll also be links to her social media and website so that you can check out more of what programs and things she has going on. And again, Laura, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It has been a pleasure, really. Thank you all for listening. Bye.
And to the listeners, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you next week. Have a fabulous day.